that certainly was not true of either season before. So that life is a little easier than it used to be. But there are many things that are the same. Everyone still wears a uniform. Everyone goes to class. Class sizes are small. The classes are still very much the way they have always been. So cadet life changes with the times, but there's probably more that's familiar than is unfamiliar from decade to decade.
But the familiar comfort and traditions of West Point would offer little protection, as the U.S. military found itself mired in Vietnam and distrusted by the American public. At the end of the conflict, the Army and West Point were in disarray and would need to spend the next 2 decades rebuilding.
This is the 2020 Medicare.
In the early 1970s, as the unpopular war in Vietnam came to an end, troops returning from combat would face a new enemy: the American people.
1970s was a difficult time for the Army and for West Point. You have the end of the Vietnam War, where there's a lot of criticism of the military service and indeed of the military academy.
But this hostile environment would force change and allow West Point to become one of the finest military schools the world has ever seen. For over 170 years at West Point, not one woman had been allowed admission to the school. A 1975 Act of Congress would rectify that problem. In 1976, the first female cadets would enter the Army, Navy, and Air Force academies. With great difficulty, West Point would open its doors upon this new era.
The first women who entered, my hat's off to them, because fewer than half were able to graduate. It was not an inviting place if you were a young woman entering as a plebe. There were 100 and some in that first class, but when they looked around at the 4,500 other cadets, they were all men.
Despite the difficulties, in 1980, 62 women finished their senior year, becoming the first women to graduate from West Point. The curriculum would also change to keep pace with the times.
The period between the 70s and the early 80s was a period of time of increasing the number of electives and beginning to see those electives being grouped in areas of concentration that had some coherence to them. Still didn't have any majors. It wasn't until classes in the early 80s where we saw what we would consider a traditional undergraduate major.
Though science and engineering classes were still prerequisites for all cadets, by 1985, the school offered 21 majors in many non-military subjects, such as behavioral science and literature.
It's important that the curriculum at West Point evolve to keep pace with changing Army needs and to keep pace with the times. Our officers must be prepared to lead a high-tech and globally engaged Army.
Duty, honor, country. West Point's motto encapsulates the essence of the school. Those who have passed through the halls of this institution have continually changed the world in which we live.
So if you're interested in your complete development as a person, with an emphasis also on honorable behavior, on ethical treatment of others, this is an ideal environment to hone those skills.
West Point's goal has always been to supply an intelligent, well-educated corps of officers to the United States Army.
We're not educating engineers and philosophers and psychologists and mathematicians and scientists. We are using engineering and philosophy and psychology and mathematics and physics and chemistry to educate Army officers.
Though the purpose has remained the same, the lessons have changed. Every battle or scientific achievement provides military knowledge which must be handed down to the next generation of leaders.
Charles V. Hall.
Joseph M.
From revolution to innovation, fortress to classroom, West Point has grown with the country, producing some of the nation's greatest leaders by teaching the ancient art of war in an ever-changing